Behind the veil, daily life and forbidden acts of nuns in the medieval imagination, the convent was seen as a sanctuary, a stronghold of purity, where women dedicated their lives to God within stone walls and vows of silence. Yet from Yorkshire to Rome, records show that life inside was often more complicated and less obedient than most believed. Not everyone who took the veil remained faithful in spirit. At the center of convent, life stood strict discipline. Writing around 512, Caesarius of Arles described nuns as gems of the church, sheltered from the spiritual wolves outside. His Regula Virginum outlined their daily routine in detail, rising before dawn for prayer, dressing modestly, avoiding vanity and idle talk. Meals were simple, voices subdued, and movement restricted. The enclosure was not just physical, it represented a lifelong spiritual vow, but the reality often fell short of this ideal. Over time, some religious houses slipped into disorder. By 1298, Pope Boniface VIII issued the decree Periculoso, requiring nuns to remain perpetually cloistered. Its language was severe. They must be shielded from occasions of lasciviousness and preserve their nunnish modesty. It was a defensive order, against temptation, scandal, and perhaps practices already taking place. Inside the quiet halls of some convents, forbidden acts did occur. At Wotton Priory in 12th century Yorkshire, one young nun, according to Aelred of Rievaulx, left as a virgin of Christ and returned an adulteress. She had taken a lover, likely a lay brother, and was reported pregnant. What followed combined punishment, escape, and eventual forgiveness, which Aelred recorded not as a warning, but as a miracle. Even so, it revealed the fragile line between holiness and human desire. At Littlemore Priory in 16th century England, discipline collapsed entirely. In 1517, investigators uncovered numerous violations. The prioress, Catherine Wells, had borne a child with the chaplain and diverted church funds for a dowry. Nuns were punished, confined in stocks, or rebelled openly. One set fire to escape. Another confessed, "I am ashamed to be here under the evil rule of my lady." These accounts came not from rumor but from official church visitation records. Yet even amid disorder, daily routines endured. Psalms were sung, manuscripts copied, bread baked. Most nuns remained faithful to their vows. But when they broke them, it was often in silence, behind locked doors, under cover of night, or through letters passed across iron grills. Life behind the veil was not only about virtue. It was about control, over space, thought, and the female body. And where control is strictest, resistance is never far away. Convent dungeons, the secret trials behind cloistered walls. A woman disappears from her convent in the dead of night. No witnesses see her leave. No record names her captors, only a short note in a legal roll, taken by persons unknown. What occurred within the cloister before her disappearance remains unwritten, and it is there in that silence that the image of the convent dungeon begins to emerge. In medieval Europe, convents were places of prayer, isolation, and obedience. But they could also become places of punishment, where transgressions, real or imagined, were dealt with not through public trials, but in secret correction. The walls that claimed to protect virtue could just as easily conceal coercion. In 1304, at the Benedictine Priory of Clementhorpe in Yorkshire, a nun named Cecilia was reportedly taken in the night. The record is brief. She was removed, along with possessions, her captors unnamed. 2 years later, at the Cistercian convent of Kirklees, another woman, Elizabeth de Hopton, was seized under similar conditions. In both cases, the king's justice role implies not scandalous elopement, but secret abduction. And where convents enforced strict discipline, the question arises, were these women trying to escape captivity within? Centuries later, the myth of the convent dungeon seized the public imagination with awful disclosures. 1836, a sensational book by Maria Monk. She claimed that in a Canadian convent, nuns were confined underground, silenced, and erased. Her vivid tales of secret trials and punishments gripped the public, fueling waves of anti-Catholic fear across North America. The book was soon discredited, but its influence reveals a deeper truth, enduring suspicion about what happened behind cloistered walls. Modern historians caution against confusing the mythical oubliette, a dungeon of no return, with the realities of convent discipline. Still, the idea persists. Even now, the notion of secret confinement in religious life reflects the tension between piety and authority. Many convents had no dungeons at all, but others, especially those under wealthy patrons or powerful bishops, may have had private chambers for correction, for silence, or simply for forgetting. The hair shearing ritual, a symbol of dishonor. She kneels in silence, head bowed. In one deliberate stroke, the blade scrapes across her scalp, removing not only hair but dignity, identity, and social standing. In the medieval world, cutting a woman's hair was never only about appearance. It was a ritual, and at times, a punishment. Hair symbolized honor, chastity, and even power. Among Frankish royalty, uncut hair was a sign of dynastic legitimacy. To shear a prince's locks was to strip him of his right to rule. Within convent walls, the same act could take on a darker role. Merovingian chronicles describe royal women entering convent life through ceremonial haircutting. In one case, a mother, renouncing worldly ambition for her daughter, cut her child's hair into the shape of a crown, marking her for sanctity. Here, the gesture meant dedication, not disgrace. But in other settings, the blade carried a harsher meaning. Medieval legal and church records show that hair shearing could serve as punishment for nuns accused of misconduct or rebellion. Forced tonsure was less a sacred act than a tool of humiliation. This practice echoes wider traditions. In legal codes, a married woman accused of adultery might be forced to appear with her hair disheveled or shorn, a public sign of moral failure. Hair once braided as a symbol of virtue became instead a mark of dishonor. Yet meanings often overlapped. In early Christianity, tonsure, shaving the crown or trimming the sides, was sacred, called the double crown, a sign of devotion to Christ. For monks and nuns, the act symbolized renunciation of vanity and the world. A paradox emerged. The same blade could sanctify or disgrace depending on who wielded it and why. Ultimately, the hair shearing ritual was not about the hair itself. It was about control of body, of spirit, and of one's place in the story of faith. Once the hair fell to the stone floor, it rarely grew back with the same meaning. Across centuries, the convent was not simply a sanctuary. It was also a site of obedience and resistance, silence and judgment. Within its walls, sacred rituals could become punishments, and the very symbols of faith could be turned into instruments of authority. The veil, the stocks, the shears, all carried meanings that shaped not only individual lives, but the moral order of entire societies. These hidden acts did more than discipline bodies. They wrote history in silence. How should we interpret the line between sanctity and suppression when the very rituals of devotion were used as tools of control? Share your thoughts below. As the papal decretal Periculoso warned in 1298, nuns were to remain perpetually cloistered, that their hearts and bodies might be safeguarded in complete chastity. But when walls rise too high, even devotion can become a cage.